Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast, with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
and Maddie. Hey, hi, hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Liturgical Shenanigans. Hannah's laughing at me.
I just think you're cute.
Oh, whatever. This is the 18th and final episode of Liturgical Shenanigans Season 1.
Season 1. Don't worry, it's just Season 1.
Yes, we will be back. This is not the last podcast ever.
you haven't seen the last of Liturgical Shenanigans.
Which that may have been an evil laugh or a happy laugh for some of you. But thanks for joining us for whether you were here for the first episode of Season 1 or you came in the middle or this is your very first episode. Thanks for being on this ride with us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to these conversations about liturgies, about
Shenanigans.
Yeah.
It's almost as if that's the name of the podcast.
Rituals, topics, sacredness, not sacredness. What's that?
Profanity.
Right.
Watch your profanity. And as this is the last episode of Season 1, we also want to let you know that we will be taking a break in July as we ready ourselves to bring you Season 2 and all the excitement, all the exciting things that we have planned or maybe we don't have planned but will happen to us eventually.
Yeah, we're going to be taking July off, a summer month, a bit of a rest. I'm hinting with my tone towards the content of this episode. But yeah, definitely plan for us to be back in August. Sometime in August. We're not committing to an exact date yet for that. But sometime in August we'll be back. Set your calendars. And we will likely see you online in other spaces during that time as well.
Oh, absolutely. We are non-stop machines, so...
Except we're not.
Which
because
is
because it's important
Yes,
to rest.
indeed. Because we're not machines.
Uh-huh.
Well, I am.
Machines should probably rest too, though.
That's also true.
Machines do rest.
You got to reboot a machine
They
every
die.
once in a while.
Tried
actually-
turning it off.
Yeah.
Turning
Turn it back on again.
I literally have a sticky note on my computer that says, "Did you try rebooting it?" with a picture of boot. Because I never remember that that's an option.
I love that.
I need a sticker like that on myself.
Yeah, wouldn't that be simple if you could just
Well,
That's what sleep is.
I mean, yes.
But
Okay,
sleep is not
have you
as
ever
simple
seen...
as just pushing a button.
Oh my gosh.
Because we're not machines.
Exactly.
I made a joke that... Or I read it, someone posted a meme that was like, wouldn't it be... I think God up there, I'm having a stroke.
That was the whole meme.
When the Lord created sleep, God went, you know what would be great? If I just let them experience not death, but a mini passing briefly once a day. And I haven't slept in months. And I said, I'm clearly being punished. I'm grounded from that little... Oh, it was, you know, it would be a nice little treat. That's what it was. And I said, I'm grounded from treats.
Yep.
So if you haven't gotten the hint, today's episode is about rest. More specifically,
Sabbath.
there you go.
Yeah. Today, as we've already said, we're going to be talking about Sabbath as sort of an introduction to the rest we are about to be taking, because we believe rest and Sabbath and intentional rhythms and rituals in life are important. So, to get the conversation started, I am going to share a poem that I wrote for a practice of Sabbath that I experienced several years ago in the Hebrew class at Western. There's a section of the class where part of the assignment is you have to take at least 2 Sabbaths within a given amount of time. So it doesn't they allow for busy schedules and things, but like you have a certain amount of time to take 2 Sabbaths, and you are invited to do a creative response of sorts to that experience. And this is my creative response that sort of paints a picture of what that experience was like for me. So, trying to think of if there's anything you need to know ahead of time.
I wonder,
Yeah, please.
should we explain, because in that course, you were invited to take a full, or at least I was invited to take a full
Yes.
Sabbath, and I
Mhm.
wonder if we should just explain what that means, because it might be that you have heard the word Sabbath thrown around, and it not have been used in the full weight of what the ritual of Sabbath actually is, in Jewish and Christian contexts.
Mhm.
Shall we do that?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So someone add something that I missed, because inevitably I will. But a full Sabbath it starts sundown on Friday and ends sundown on Saturday. If you are in like an Orthodox Jewish home, usually that means truly everything rests. So technology rests. You don't flip your light switches on or off again. So families that I know that practice Sabbath really seriously decide which rooms are just the lights are always going to be on. So the bathrooms, they just flip all the switches on. They turn off or cover their clocks. Your phones are away. The oven, often in a Jewish home, will have something called like a Sabbath mode. So it's just always kind of warm enough that you could heat your meal.
That's cool.
Meals are made if they need to be heated ahead of time. Only walking to and from the places that you need to go takes place. No TVs on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a reboot.
Yes.
It's really lovely. And the assignment we were given for our Shabbat, we called it, and I will call it in these poems.
Because that's the Hebrew word for Sabbath.
Yes. We were invited to do that sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and to attempt to not engage schoolwork during that time, and invited to not engage other work, but with people being in, church leadership. That was often hard. So at least not schoolwork. Invitation to not use phones or other technology. Anything else about that particular assignment that I'm forgetting?
Yeah, covering clocks. Trying to connect to a lot of it was encouraged. Like if it's a nice day, try to get out in nature.
Yeah.
And restore some rhythms around that.
And it's also like a time of connection with God, with the divine, too.
Right. It's not just sitting around and doing literally nothing either. It's more, it's saying no to your worldly work, and yes to godly work. Oh no.
Yeah,
It's saying yes to God's provision.
There we go.
You don't have to be stuck in the grind that we often talk about in our culture. You get to trust that enough has been provided for you to take this day of rest.
Yeah, the world will keep spinning, even if you stop spinning for a moment.
And there's all sorts of ways and ways that shows up, intricacies and things that I'm excited to get to chat about, but perhaps as a way for us to kind of lead into the conversation around it. Hannah, you prepared, or not prepared a piece today, but brought a piece to share.
Right, from the class.
From the class, yeah.
The final things to know, just because it was a Hebrew class, so there are like 2 Hebrew words I use. Adonai is the name for God, and Bahoshech means in the darkness, essentially. So, without further ado, please settle yourself into your seat. Notice where your body might be holding tension and invite yourself to Relax as you hear these words. Take a slow breath in and a slow breath out. And listen. Shabbat 1. A full kind of empty. A trip to the grocery store to begin with. Big grocery stores are not places where you look people in the eye. I've got stuff to get, you've got kids to yell at. It's better if we pretend we're not filling up the same space. But tonight is Shabbat, a night for looking people in the eye. Man in the bread aisle, I see you. I see the hardness in your face that will not be moved. I see your face tell me that you expect no kindness from the world. You do not notice my eyes at first, and when you do, your face indeed will not be moved. But you see my smile, and you nod, and I see the likeness of God in you. Woman standing by the door, I see you. I see your eyes on the floor. I see the brace on your wrist. I see the way your body expects itself to be invisible. But when you see my eyes seeing you, my smile seeing you, your smile beams back a great beam. You are seen, and I see the likeness of God in you. I walk out into the dark night air of Shabbat, a night for looking the handiwork of God in the eye. Bahoshech. Voices of the dearest friends mingle with the darkness of the night we speak long into, spindles of light, longing not to be divided quite yet. The day's last word. It seems I have forgotten how to pray, and in doing so have forgotten who I am. So as the great light begins to sink in the sky, I find silence and a comfy chair, and I pray. I remember who you are, and in doing so, remember who I am. Shabbat 2, Travels and Stories. The fields are before us and behind us. The sun has tipped below the clear horizon, leaving trails of pink and deepest purple. Adonai has eveninged the evening. Our drive continues, but my working stops. It is not finished, never finished, but it will wait, for Adonai has eveninged the evening. A quiet song makes its way through my lips. We stare at the sky. Miles pass, headlights turn on, stars come out. Adonai has eveninged the evening. Shalom Shabbat. Grandma insists on prepping for breakfast herself. Her piano is an out-of-tune old friend that her arthritic fingers cannot visit like they used to. So while Grandma is in the kitchen, we provide the music. We fill up the air with psalms and old camp worship songs, and light mingles with the darkness of this winter night. Bahoshech. I wake in the early darkness to my heart pounding an anxious rhythm of work neglected. O my heart, why have you forgotten the rhythm of rest and delight? A lot of different pieces of stories there.
What the hell, Hannah?
What does that mean, Maddie?
That was so good.
Well, thanks.
You're so ridiculous.
Okay.
God.
I'll take it. It's a compliment. Maddie being mad at me. I love
So rude. I love evening to the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say that all the time now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. That's a thing that happens a lot in Hebrew. That like in English isn't really an acceptable thing. Like, you don't repeat things. Repetition is not necessarily a good thing in our language, but in Hebrew, you have like the verb version of something paired with the noun version of something pretty often. So even in the very first the very first part of the poem where I'm in the grocery store, I talk about the woman standing at the door as her smile beaming back a great beam. And then again, Adonai has eveninged the evening. It's just such a cool thing about Hebrew that I love, and that just isn't there in English. So I like that part too.
So good.
Yeah.
There's so many beautiful images in there and so many different iterations of what it's like to practice and experience Sabbath. It's worthwhile kind of noting, as much as our initial comments were kind of centered around a pretty full experience. Maddie, you described a pretty full experience of what perhaps a Jewish household would experience
very
as Sabbath.
like do the whole thing and
Right.
do it right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we what you've experienced.
I did the
you,
whole
Maddie,
thing and I
has-
did it right.
Right. You've experienced that. A number
With
of
a
us
Jewish
are-
family.
Yeah, for sure. A number of us are going to be talking about Sabbath as we've experienced it, kind of through the lens of practicing it through a Christian perspective, though heavily informed by the Jewish tradition and the Jewish practice of Sabbath, and we'll probably end up quoting from Abraham Joshua Heschel at some point or another. So it'll just to note our kind of context and where we're coming from for this conversation. Because even just a couple of those, like you went to the grocery store on
Fail.
Sabbath,
I know.
which would be
And we were driving in a car
And
as
I
the
did
month
think it in
started.
my
I'm like,
brain.
oh,
I won't
yeah.
lie to you. I was like, oh, interesting.
I know.
Oh, you're still driving, are you?
I looked at your papers and I remembered what my thought was, which is
Yeah.
ironic because it's about remembrance. You talk about forgetting how to pray and remembering God. And so much of Sabbath for me is remembering that my body exists, remembering where I am. Because for me, if I'm moving really, really quickly, which I always am, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. But also it's remembering that I belong to God, not the world. Which I think can feel, it might be like a really triggering statement to say for people or to hear. And I think it probably used to be for me at one point too. But what I mean by that is not necessarily, when I think of being belonging to God, I don't think of it as like, a white man owning me, I guess, would be the triggering thing. What you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't think of it as this aggressive thing, but more the world doesn't get to dictate who I am or what I do. God has already made me who I am, and I am made to rest, and I am made to say yes to things that are life-giving and life-flourishing for me, and I get to do that. And I was designed to do that. Yeah. And I just think that that's so beautiful and hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the practice of Sabbath is a difficult one to instill into our current
It's so
into our
hard.
current rhythm.
Even if you've experienced really beautiful versions of it, you're like, yes, this is so good and so helpful. I'm going to do this all the time. It's so hard to keep it that way, because the other thing about Sabbath is it's a communal practice, right? It's not just you separating from the world and going off by your lonesome. You could choose to do that for your Sabbath, but also this is about an entire community taking a break. Your community not saying, hey, I need you to respond to this email right away. It's the whole community agreeing, this is when we rest. God has provided for all of us enough so that we can all rest. And the whole world doesn't stop. It doesn't take Shabbat the same time that you might try to. So it's really hard to just be like, no, I'm sorry, I can't respond to your emails for the next little bit. It's,
And it's a privilege.
Yeah.
I think we tend to forget. We like to preach Sabbath and tell people, just take a break, just rest. And your livelihood often might depend on you not resting, because as Hannah named, like, the world doesn't pause. we're not Jerusalem. Jerusalem pauses once a week, and that's lovely. We are not a society that pauses or supports pausing well. So, yeah, if you're at a job that I can't take a day off because I won't be able to pay my rent this month, or it's the only way I can get food on the table, yeah, you don't get to lean into Sabbath. So I also think it's important to say, us being able to do this as a school assignment, it was a privilege.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets to do that.
Right.
I have a lot of thoughts. But on that particularly, it makes me think about our role as folks who get to shape worship, preach, that sort of thing. I think the main way I've heard Sabbath brought up in church, and this is maybe just my background, it's like you should go to church. Is how Sabbath, which, no, but that's maybe a way that we've translated Sabbath a bit, but typically the church worship day is actually not the Sabbath day, right? Like Saturday would be Sabbath and Sunday would be our worship day. But if you look at the New Testament, they were going to the temple on the Sabbath, so there is a link there, blah, blah, blah. But as opposed to an individual mandate of Sabbath, which, they went after Jesus for that too, breaking the rules, or like, Hannah going to the grocery store. It's terrible.
I love going to the grocery store.
Cannot relate.
It's going out in nature. You're seeing creation and
Yeah.
tasting the goodness.
I get to think about all the farms that the food came from.
And you saw people. You
I saw people. It was such a holy moment. I've never had a moment like that in a grocery store before, because it's always, oh my gosh, there's so many people. What if, like, I'm just going to pretend nobody else is here, or don't look at me, I'm dressed in terrible things today because I'm going to the grocery store. But that night I was just like, I have all the time in the world, and the sky is beautiful, and I'm just going to look at people, because I don't do that because people scare me. And then I did, and it was great. Anyway.
What I was going to go with it, though, just is, as we look at the Old Testament passages on Sabbath, paired with the don't do stuff, is the don't, like use like the machines and such, but it would be the animals are resting, and you need to let your servants, whether they're Jewish or not, whether they're God's people or not, everyone is going to rest on these days.
Well, not harvesting, because letting even nature rest.
Yeah.
Plants rest.
Well, and then like the seventh year kind of,
Right.
But what I was saying is there is a communal cultural aspect to it too, and the fact that it's politic, Phil. The fact that we live in a world where we've created a society that expects people not to rest, which was true in Bible times too, right? This is countercultural all through history. I think our call as preaching pastors, theologians, worship leaders, whatever, is to preach to those who have the option to pay more, to allow there to be resources, it's not just, hey, make sure you come to church on Sunday. It's what are we doing to shape a world where people are enabled to not be slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it can become a shame thing for the people that don't have control over that.
Yeah,
right?
say more.
I've heard it preached as like, if you preach it to a working person or the working class, it can often be received as, I'm doing something wrong by working 7 days a week. And yeah, it just becomes you're not Christianing correctly, or you're not committed to, you don't act like you belong to God. You're acting like you belong to the world. And yeah, I don't think that's not what the message is for at all. And not like, it is for the working class in the sense that you get to do this. You're designed to do this. You have the right to do this. You are worthy of this. And also, the reason you're not able to do this is not your fault. It's not because you aren't committing yourself enough to spending time with God. It's the system is broken.
Unfortunately, we're in very good company in saying these things. That's every time Jesus interacts with the Sabbath, he's saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
He's gathering wheat on the Sabbath. He's asking people, do you really think that this rule is working? Does your society actually reflect what is going on in what is intended with the Sabbath? We're also in good company because I think you're right that it's that Sabbath has always been countercultural.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Sabbath as Resistance by Brueggemann that talks about how Sabbath is instituted straight out of Egypt. And it's a direct counter to the people of Israel being enslaved for a long time and not knowing how to stop, never trusting that they could stop and not be punished by it. So it's an act against the tyranny of time, and the tyranny of the little god Pharaoh, and showing how this God is different. How and Pharaoh as this sort of like A, egotistical, and B, consumeristic force of always laying up more storehouses, always building more things, always saving and saving and saving and saving. What is it like to not do that for a day, to trust that there will be provision? And so I think we're all of what we're saying is in keeping with centuries of people trying to adhere to Sabbath. It's always hard, and it's not just hard in like the very real, I'm gonna it's just hard for me to pay rent if I take a Sabbath. It's also hard because your soul catches up to you on that day. And there's all sorts of things that happen when your soul catches up to you if you actually take a break.
I too took that same Hebrew class and had the assignment to do the 2 Sabbaths, and the silence was so loud the day I took mine, because I put my phone away and turned off the clocks, and the only thing that kept me going was I was having Phil and Phil's family over for dinner that night. I wanted to do like a good Shabbat meal. Remember I ordered that challah bread?
Yeah.
And you were supposed to pick it up for me, and the bakery didn't have it.
It didn't.
And I couldn't even yell at them because I didn't have my phone, so Phil couldn't even tell me.
Oh, sad.
So, where was I going with this? Oh, the silence.
The silence.
It was just so loud to be alone with my thoughts, and I hadn't been alone with my thoughts in, frankly, years, I don't think, until that point. I went for a run, and usually when I run, I run to disassociate from everything, and I play music so loud. I do not want to hear myself breathing. I do not want to hear my feet hitting the pavement. I do not want to be able to hear anything around me. I want to hear the music so loud that it like hurts my body somehow. It's whatever. I didn't play any music when I went on this run, and it was such a weird, it was the hardest run I've ever done. I was by far noticed how exhausted I was the most that I've ever noticed it before, and that my knees hurt and my ankles hurt. And I took a really long nap because I didn't realize how tired I was until that day. I mean, it's painful.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why, in particular, I wanted that very last stanza to be in there, because in that I talk about waking up in the darkness with my heart pounding, the anxious rhythm of work neglected. And I went back and read a larger journal that I kept during these 2 Sabbath practices, and I discovered how much shame I had about not working. Like, it wasn't even like, you know, it wasn't even that I couldn't afford to. It was, it's going to mean that I'm lazy if I'm not working, which I've also discovered is deeply connected to all of the ADHD things that I have pulled up, because I always feel behind. And if I always feel behind, I can't afford to stop working, because then I'll just fall even further behind. I'll never catch up, but I'm never going to catch up anyway, which is one more thought about this. Somewhere in there, I talk about while we're driving somewhere, I stop my work. It's not finished. It's never finished, which when we were studying some of the passages about Sabbath in Scripture, there's this, sorry, too many thoughts trying to all come out at once. Sabbath happens whether your work is done or not. Sabbath happens whether you are attentive to it or not. And I noticed myself, like, my deepest longing For rest is that I could experience all of the work being done. So I just want Sabbath to be that.
Because then you could
Yes.
deserve
Because-
the rest.
Yeah. But that's not what Sabbath is. Sabbath is saying, my work isn't done, and I'm stopping. I know the work will be there when I pick it up again after 24 hours, and I know that it's gonna be okay if I set it down and just stop for 24 hours, and I'm not gonna fall desperately far behind because it'll be okay. It sucks. It sucks so
Because the truth
much.
is, you don't know.
You
that it's
don't.
gonna
don't
be
know
The
that.
active
okay.
trust in
Oh,
that.
it's so hard.
Oof.
It just it woke me up anxiously in the middle of the night, being like, "You haven't been working. What is wrong with you?"
Yeah.
It's awful.
Where does your worth come from? What is your identity? And what do you need to do to deserve a break?
Well, yes. And what has claimed your whole sense of self and time, your whole life? I mean, yes, maybe that does mean it's your identity. All right, it's the same thing. But like when I graduated seminary, everybody kept asking me, "Do you feel so relieved? Doesn't it feel so nice to be done?" And I just was like, I don't know. I graduated and all of a sudden I was filled with worry and anxiety about so many other things that I didn't even know weren't taking up space and residence in my body.
Yeah.
So even when it feels like the work is done,
Right.
never mind.
Yeah.
Well, because worrying is a strategy that we use to feel in control of things, right? Like if I can be anxious about it, if I can be trying to think about it, if I can try to hold it all in my body, if I can always be at it, then I know I'm doing everything I can to make everything be okay.
And I will be safe.
Well, I'm doing everything I can to be safe.
Yeah.
Whereas if we have a mindset where I put it down and I stop.
Woof.
Yeah.
There's so many what ifs.
When actually, it's like, there's very Jesus-y, right? Like whoever by worrying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Added a day to their
me,
life.
me laying in bed, anxiously going over everything tomorrow. Maybe I'll plan out a conversation and do better at it, but probably I just lost sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
What really happened there?
Yeah, Heschel talks about the Sabbath as actually something that suffuses the entire week.
Yep.
And that the rest of the days are a pilgrimage that is suffused by Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so the active Sabbath, kind of waking up to that, man, I worry all the time. What's it like to lay it down? Makes me like when there was a brief window of my life that I got to practice Sabbath pretty regularly, and it woke me up to like how often through the week I am in a state of worry, and within the illusion of my own control over my existence, and that I can control my state of worry or even my safety often. And so the intentional, or maybe not safety, I'll say security. And so the intentional laying down of that drive and that grasp, my own, or at least the narrative of that grasp that I tell myself onto control for a day, wound up suffusing the whole week. And how I interacted with spaces that I felt either insecure in, or spaces that I was looking to try to control in some way.
Jackson, real quick. Who's Heschel?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I briefly said his whole name. Abraham Joshua Heschel is a rabbi, and writes beautifully and compellingly in his book called The Sabbath.
It's so good.
It's so good.
It's a short little book too.
It is. It's a really beautiful book. It has a lot of, there's some midrash in it, which is delightful. We've talked about midrash on the show before. But Heschel is also an accomplished theologian. I was not prepared to give a whole bio on him, but he has actually a really compelling story about his journey towards his theology. He was involved in a lot of kind of interfaith communication in America in the late 90s, I believe, like mid to late 90s. And he just did a lot of work of trying to open up the idea of Sabbath to the modern mind, modern, like kind of the 1950s on kind of mind. Writes really compellingly about that, and a lot like you you'll see his books on the prophets. You'll see his books on a lot of Old Testament theology that finds its way onto shelves, certainly of the Jewish tradition, but also into Christian traditions as well, as we seek to understand those scriptures.
Thank you.
Maybe it's like a wrapping up sort of thing. So what?
What? We're wrapping up?
Yeah, I know, right? There's
It's wild.
I have so much to say about rest.
We'll have to do an after show.
You guys should come join us for the after show because we have a lot more to say about Sabbath.
I'm sure we do. By way of a wrapping up sort of question, for those of us that are, liturgists, preachers, whatever, so what? How does Sabbath, knowledge of Sabbath, practice of Sabbath inform us as we shape worship services and the communities that we get to shepherd and be part of?
I think of incorporating Sabbath practices as being part of trying to build a healthy system, a sustainable system. So even outside of Christian circles, just making sure rest is a normal part of your system's rhythms as a preventative measure and not a prescriptive measure. And by that, I mean, you're not doing it because everybody is burned out already. And so now we have no choice and we have to pause. That is prescriptive. How much more fruitful would it be if we just built it into our existing, even just, it's part of your job. Part of your job is to rest. Why? I know. Okay, I've made it work.
You made it work.
But I hope you know what I mean.
I think we do. I hope we do.
The system would just be so much better off and healthier. And I also think people would like each other in that system a little bit more probably if they got a break and got to come in rested and not and with their tanks full instead of chronically empty and bleeding.
All of the research says that makes for a more productive workplace.
Which is hilarious.
And then my
because it's
brain
not
goes
supposed
like,
to
but
be
we're
about
not trying to make this
productivity."
about productivity.
It's and it's
That's
hard
not
to
what it's
not
about.
use productive language.
It feels like we have to convince
Yeah.
a productivity-minded.
But I think
It's how we get you in the door. And then
Yeah.
we tell you that that's not what it's actually about.
Yeah. There's an interesting Heschel quote again, just to continue quoting Heschel rampantly. But as ways, because there's lots of like just try it on kind of language around Sabbath and there's Sabbath moments and try to figure out a way to just try it on for size and see what happens. And a quote from Heschel that's a little in that vein. I'm sure it builds out to a more robust point than what I will quote today. But it's, if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. And if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. So what does it look like? If you, I'm just going to, forgive me for these kind of tropish cliches. If you are constantly, if you're a graphic designer or an accountant or something like that, what does it look like to Sabbath by taking care of your plants? If you are a carpenter or an electrician, what does it look like to finally sit down with that novel that you've been putting off for a long time? And that's sort of reconnecting with your soul. Another image that Heschel uses is the Sabbath bride returning your soul to you on the Sabbath. What is it like to find a way to remember that part of yourself? And then let that influence, not for productivity's sake, but let that influence the rest of your life as well, outpouring from that moment.
Yeah. And it also probably means not letting other people tell you what Sabbath is for you. Reading a book might be work for someone and extremely life-giving for someone else. I imagine my spouse would argue that every time he plays a video game that is Sabbath, and I no. Right? Because I don't get it, because it's not Sabbath for me. So also not letting other people dictate what is rest for you. The thing I will asterisk that what I don't mean is sometimes people who love you might encourage you to take restful practices, and you might try to claim, Maddie might try to claim that her job is life-giving in Sabbath, and it indeed is not.
Sure.
That is not. People might lovingly push you out of work. I don't mean lie.
and your job can be life-giving.
For sure.
And you should still
For
take a
sure.
Sabbath.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think one thing I wanted to tie what Jackson was talking about to Phil's question. One of the so what's for me, for us as leaders in whatever communities we're in, the practice of Sabbath changes you as a leader. It allows you to be present to yourself and to your community and to God in a totally different way. So just like I think so what, because you'll be a better leader. You'll be a better you. I had one other so what and I lost it. I will maybe say it later.
Sure, I got one while you're thinking of
please.
it. Another so what is there is no cry for Sabbath without a cry for justice. And ensuring your community cultivates a Sabbath rhythm and you cultivate a Sabbath rhythm means noticing where people can't.
Yep.
And so it dictates your community. If you're a leader in that community, if you want to be a Sabbath community, it means working for justice for people so that they're able to experience that rest and that presence of God. So in that way, Sabbath becomes something that's not just a day, not just a rest, but a whole ethos, a whole code of ethics, a whole way of life that influences how you show up in the world, again, through the whole week. You rest for Sabbath but out of Sabbath pours the Sabbath mindset, and it doesn't exist without justice.
Go ahead.
That might mean paying someone for a 7-day work week, even if they only work a 6-day work week.
Right.
It means when you invite someone to take a day off work, do not call them and send them emails expecting them to answer you.
Yep.
Yeah. I just
Go with yours.
I practicing the Sabbath and talking about the Sabbath in our communities helps that become a community practice, which allows us to do what Jackson was talking about with this connection to justice and how we can support and love and work for each other's humanity. If we as leaders, I can't think of the word, say that we should do this practice. There you go.
Right, and I would jump on with you and say, not just say that we should do it, which is, I think, a lot of Christian-y, pastory, leadery people are really good at saying that. Doing it is way harder. And I think in doing it, like you're all saying, it changes you. It changes how you understand your worth and where it comes from. Not because I worked to earn this. I think there's a great idol of, oh, look, here I go. There's a great idol of merit in our culture, and that there's this weird belief that because I'm successful, because I'm educated, because I happened to have a bazillion people come to my church, I earned this, I did this, I built this. And I think Sabbath undoes a lot of that for us as we rest and realize that as we create spaces for others. And if we can really believe that no one earns rest, that everyone, it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a gift from the beginning. And that there's that justice piece coming in, right? It's kind of this great equalizer or imago Dei piece that we see the image of God and that all of us are worthy and deserve, need Sabbath. And I just resonate so deeply with what you're all saying about how the justice piece tying into that we make sure folks get to have that. Yeah, and that it can really be a piece that helps us to. One of the things I hear coming up against it is the passage, the one that doesn't work doesn't eat kind of thing, which is Phil translation here, right? Grossly misinterpreted to often be about those welfare seeking folks shouldn't get their paychecks, when much more that's written toward the rich folks who are able to not work, while the people who have to work for a living are out in the fields, and those rich folks eating all the food before the people who have to work can come in. And to me, that's actually a picture of what we're talking about with Sabbath here. We need to make sure that it's not just the people who have, through fortune, through family, through whatever, acquired enough means that they don't need to work all the time. They're not the only ones who rest.
Yeah.
And I think the Sabbath practice is not the same as just enjoying your riches.
Right.
You know? And that's where I think that can really be a countercultural practice, to recognize this is an imago Dei birthright that we all have as humans.
And it's healthy for, going back, Phil, to what you said, it reminded us earlier of even nature getting to rest. COVID-19, as awful as the shutdown was, and it had many bad consequences even for families with lost jobs and closed businesses, the earth literally healed. The sky was seen in places the sky hadn't been seen in. Waters were clear again. Earth is screaming for us to please stop.
Take a nap, humans.
Yeah. And also COVID-19 is a good example of why we have so much work to do for people to get to rest, that ruined people financially.
Yeah.
And it put individuals, families, systems in dire circumstances because they were forced to shut down. That means we have not put systems in place to allow even for forced pauses, let alone the one that we were designed and created for. I have more to say.
Yeah, there's lots more to say. I have
better
a
do an
whole
after show.
little bit of
I
a
know,
tirade about
I know.
creation and Sabbath
I
that I
have
want to
one
go
about
on.
caretakers.
But we are coming to the end of our time for this episode and for this season of Liturgical Shenanigans.
And we are entering into a time of rest.
Here we go.
And we're trusting that you will all be here when we get back.
We do hope that you continue to tune in to the podcast. This is a great time to catch up on anything you might have missed throughout the season. We're only taking a month off, so don't worry. We're going to be coming back soon.
If you jump in on Patreon, there's how many after shows in there now?
There's a whole
16?
16,
You can
17,
definitely
18.
fill your listening quota.
For sure, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yep, you got that. You've got our postings on Instagram that you can continue to engage with. You also have the Discord channel.
We would love you to come chat with us. We'll still be there.
Yes, come talk to us on Discord. Also, this is a great time to give us some feedback if you're so inclined. Or it could be feedback in saying, Maddie, you talk too much and I wish you'd talk less. But it could also it could also be, hey, I'm really hoping I see this in the next season. Let us
Or
know.
knowing
What do
was-
you want to
what was
hear?
helpful to you too.
What was helpful? Oh yeah, it can be good feedback as well.
Right. That's a good idea. We might even make like a kind of a little bit more of like a formal, what do you want to hear about next season? Because we're still, it's like the next season is fluid, and we're excited to kind of come up with some of the content for next season yet.
For sure.
So yeah, I guess, we're taking the month off, but I guess stay tuned to a bunch of other stuff.
We said from the podcast. We didn't say from
All the
Wayfolk.
things, for sure. Yeah. Well,
We love you guys.
Yeah, and we're gonna keep chatting about this in the after show. So.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.